Hello, my name is Mary Bear Shannon. I am a reference librarian at the Haverford Township Free Library, and this is Wine and Words Wednesday. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wine and Words Wednesday. I actually don't have any wine today, so I have my gin and tonic because it is kind of a hot day. So I hope you're ready to settle in for an adult story time, hopefully with an adult beverage or something that can help you relax after maybe a long day in front of a computer screen or a long day helping kids with distance learning. I'm glad to have you here again. My name is Mary Bear Shannon. I am a reference librarian at the Haverford Township Free Library, and this is Wine and Words Wednesday. I am broadcasting to today from my attic because it's the quietest part of my house that's not full of lawnmowers and construction vehicles and kids making a lot of noise. So I am glad to be here, and I have some poems and some prose to share with you today for Wine and Words Wednesday. My I was thinking, we really are in kind of not self-imposed, but not self-imposed solitude. Many of us have been in our homes for the last 2 months, whether we like it or not. And I thought, I guess I was feeling kind of thoughtful and philosophic about this whole concept of being on our own, whether we like it or not. There are days I like it better than others. And so I thought I would share some poems and then a very short excerpt about being alone and the merits or not so merits of solitude. So the first poem I'm going to share with you today for Wine and Words Wednesday is I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. This is William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. They stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought, for oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. And that was I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud by William Wordsworth. If you're just joining us, my name is Mary Shannon, and I am a reference librarian at the Haverford Township Free Library. This is Wine and Words Wednesday. I don't have wine today, but I do have a gin and tonic, and hope that you also have a beverage and are ready to hear some poems. Today we're doing some on just the concept of solitude. So here's my next poem. This is Things by Liesl Muller. What happened is we grew lonely, living among the things. So we gave the clock a face, and the chair a back, the table 4 stout legs, which will never suffer fatigue. We fitted our shoes with tongues as smooth as our own, and hung tongues inside bells so we could listen to their emotional language. And because we loved graceful profiles, the pitcher received a lip, the bottle a long, slender neck. Even what was beyond us was recast in our image. We gave the country a heart, the storm an eye, the cave a mouth, so we could pass into safety. That was Things by Lisa Muller. My next poem is Alone by the famous author and poet Edgar Allan Poe. From childhood's hour, I have not been, as others were, I have not seen, as others saw, I could not bring my passions from a common spring. From the same source I have not taken my sorrow, I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone, and all I loved alone. Then in my childhood, in the dawn of my most stormy life, was drawn from every depth of good and ill the mystery which binds me still. From the torrent of the fountain, from the red cliff of the fountain, of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in the autumn tint of gold, from the lightning in the sky as it passed me flying by, from the thunder and the storm and the cloud that took the form, when the rest of heaven was blue, of a demon in my view. And that was Alone by Edgar Allan Poe. We are doing poems today about solitude because many of us have been experiencing solitude as we have been social distancing in our homes. And I thought this was appropriate today. My next poem is The Sound of One Fork by Minnie Bruce Pratt. Through the window screen, I can see the angle of gray roof and the silence that spreads in the branches of the pecan tree as the sun goes down. I am waiting for a lover. I am alone in a solitude that vibrates like the cicada in hot mid-morning, that waits like the lobed sassafras leaf just before. Its dark green turns into red, then waits, like the honeybee in the mouth of the purple lobelia. While I wait, I can hear the random clink of one fork against a plate. The woman next door is eating supper alone. She is 60 perhaps, and for many years has eaten by herself the tomatoes, the corn, and okra that she grows in her backyard garden. Her small metallic sound persists, as quiet almost as the windless silence, persists like the steady random click of a redbird cracking a few more seeds before the sun gets too low. She does not hurry, she does not linger. Her younger neighbors think that she is lonely, but I know what sufficiency she may possess. I know what can be gathered from year to year, gathered from what is near to hand, as I do elderberries, the bend in damp thickets by the road, gathered and preserved, jars and jars shining in rows of claret red, made at times with help, a friend or a lover, but consumed long after they are gone and I sit alone at the kitchen table. And when I sit in the last heat of Sunday afternoons on the porch steps in the acid breath of boxwoods, I also know desolation. The week is over. The coming night will not lift. I am exhausted from making each day. My family, my children live in other states. The woman I love in other towns. I would rather be here than with them in the old ways. But when all that's left of the sunset is the red reflection underneath the clouds. When I get up and come to fix supper in the darkened kitchen, I am often lonely for them. In the morning and the evening, we are by ourselves. The woman next door and I. Still, we persist. I open the drawer to get out the silverware. She goes to her garden to pull weeds and pick the crookneck squash that turn yellow in late summer. I walk down to the pond in the morning to watch and wait for the blue heron who comes at first light to feed on minnows that swim through her shadow in the water. She stays until the day grows so bright that she cannot endure it and leaves with her hunger unsatisfied. She bows her wings and slowly lifts into flight, gray and slate blue against a paler sky. I know she will come back to see the light create a russet curve of land on the farther bank, where the wild rice bends heavy and ripe under the first blackbirds. I know she will come back. I see the light curve, and in the fall and rise of her wing. So my last poem, and then I have a very short excerpt to read, but my last poem is Ode to Solitude by Alexander Pope. We are reading poems about solitude today, since it seems appropriate after 8 or 9 weeks in our quarantine. So this is Ode on Solitude by Alexander Pope. Happy the man whose wish and care a few paternal acres bound, content to breathe his native air in his own ground, whose herds with milk, whose fields with bread, whose flocks supply him with attire, whose trees in summer wield him shade, in winter fire. Blessed who can unconcernedly find hours, days, and years slide soft away. In health of body, peace of mind, quiet by day, sound sleep by night, study and ease, together mixed, sweet recreation, and innocence with which most does please, with meditation. Thus let me live unseen, unknown. Thus unlamented let me die, steal from the world and not a stone where I lie. And that was Ode on Solitude by Alexander Pope. So the last thing I'd like to read today is an excerpt from Henry David Thoreau's Walden. He was a man who purposely lived in solitude for 2 years around Walden Pond in Massachusetts. He lived between 1817 and 1862. He was an essayist, poet, and philosopher. He was best known for his book Walden, which we're going to read from, which is a reflection upon simple living and natural surroundings. He embarked on this 2-year experiment in simple living on July 4th, 1845, when he moved into a small house that he had built on land owned by Emerson in a second growth forest around the shores of Walden Pond. This is a pretty famous excerpt. You may have remembered some of this from Dead Poets Society, which is one of my favorite movies. So, an excerpt from Walden Pond. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what I had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discovered that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation, unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out the marrow of life. to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. And if proved to be mean, why then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it, and publish its meanness to the world? Or if I were sublime, to know it by experience, and to be able to give true account of it in my next excursion. For most men, it appears to me, are in a strange uncertainty about it, whether it is of the devil or of God, and have somewhat hastily concluded that is the chief end of man, here to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Still, we live meanly like ants. Through the fable tells us that we were long ago changed into men. Like pygmies, we fight with cranes. It is error upon error, and clout upon clout. And our best virtue has for its occasion a superfluous and inevitable wretchedness. Our life is frittered away in detail. An honest man has hardly need to count more than his 10 figures, or in extreme cases he may add his 10 toes and lump the rest. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. I say, let your affairs be as 2 or 3, and not 100 or 1,000. Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen, and keep your accounts on your thumbnail. In the midst of this chopping sea of civilized life, such are the clouds and storms and quicksands and 1,001 items to be allowed for, that a man has to live if he would not founder and go to the bottom and not make his port at all, by dead reckoning, and he must be a great calculator indeed who succeeds. Simplify, simplify. Instead of 3 meals a day, if it be necessary, eat but 1. Instead of 100 dishes, 5, and reduce other things in proportion. Our life is like a German confederacy made up of petty states, with its boundary forever fluctuating, so that even a German cannot tell you how it's bounded at any moment. The nation itself, with all its so-called internal improvements, which, by the way, are all external and superficial, it is just such an unwieldy and overgrown establishment, cluttered with furniture and tipped up by its own traps, ruined by luxury and heedless expense, by what of calculation and worthy of aim, as the 1,000,000 households in the land. And the only cure for it, as for them, is in a rigid economy, a stern and more than Spartan simplicity of life, an elevation of purpose. It lives too fast. Men think that it is essential that the nation have commerce and export ice and talk through a telegraph and ride 30 miles an hour without a doubt, whether they do or not. But whether we should live like baboons or like men, it is a little uncertain. If we do not get out of sleepers and forge rails and devote days and nights to the work, but go to tinkering upon our lives to improve them, who will build railroads? And if railroads are not built, how shall we get to heaven in season? But if we stay at home and mind our business, who will want of railroads? We do not ride on the railroad, it rides upon us. Did you ever think that those sleepers are that underlie the railroad? Each one is a man, an Irishman or a Yankee man. The rails are laid on them, and they are covered with sand, and the cars run smoothly over them. They are sound sleepers, I assure you, and every few years A new lot is laid down and run over, so that if some have the pleasure of riding on a rail, others have the misfortune of being ridden upon. And when they run over a man that is walking in his sleep, a supernumerary sleeper in the wrong position, and wake him up, and suddenly stop the cars, and make a hue and a cry about it, as if it were an exception. I am glad to know that it takes a gang of men for every 5 miles to keep the sleepers down, and level in their beds. As it is, this is a sign that they may sometime get up again. Why should we live with such hurry and waste of life? We are determined to be starved before we are hungry. Men say that a stitch in time saves 9, and so they take 1,000 stitches today to save 9 tomorrow. As for work, we haven't any of any consequence. We have the Saints' Vitus dance, and cannot possibly keep our heads still. If I should only give a few pulls at the parish bell rope, as for a fire, that is without setting the bell, there is hardly a man on his farm in the outskirts of Concord, notwithstanding that press of engagements, which was his excuse so many times this morning, nor a boy, nor a woman, I might almost say, but would forsake all and follow that sound, not mainly to save property from flames, but if we will confess the truth, such more to see it burn, since burn it must. And we, if it known, did not set it on fire, or to see it put out, or have a hand in it, if that is done as handsomely, yes, if it were the parish church itself. Hardly a man takes a half-hour's nap for dinner, but when he wakes, he holds up his head and asks, "What's the news?" as if the rest of mankind had stood still in his sentinels. Some give directions to be waked every half hour, doubtless for no other purpose, and then to pay for it. They tell what they have dreamed. After a night's sleep, the news is indispensable as the breakfast. Pray tell me anything new that has happened to man anywhere on the globe, and he reads it over his coffee and rolls, that a man has his eyes gouged out in the morning on the Wachito River, never dreaming the while that he lives in the dark, unfathomed mammoth cave of his world, and has but the rudiment of an eye itself. For my part, I would easily do without the post office. I think that there are very important communications that made through it. To speak, very few communications that are made through it. To speak critically, I never received more than 1 or 2 letters in my life. I wrote this some years ago. They were worth the postage. The penny post is commonly an institution through which you seriously offer a man that penny for his thoughts, which is so often safely offered in jest. And I am sure that I never read any memorable news in a newspaper. If we read of one man robbed or murdered or killed by accident, or one house burned, or one vessel wrecked, or one steamboat blown up, or one cow run over on the Western Railroad, or one mad dog killed, or one lot of grasshoppers in the winter, we never need read of another. One is enough. If you are acquainted with the principle, what do you care for a myriad instances and application? To a philosopher, all news, as it is called, is gossip, and they who edit and read it are an old woman over their tea. Yet not a few are greedy after this gossip. There was such a rush, as I hear, the other day at one of the offices to learn the foreign news by the last arrival, that several large squares of plate glass belonging to the establishment were broken by the pressure. News which I seriously think a ready wit might write at 12 months or 12 years beforehand with sufficient accuracy. As for Spain, for instance, if you know how to throw a Don Carlos and the Infantata and Don Pedro and Seville and Granada from the time to time in the right proportions. They may have changed the names a little since I saw the papers, and serve up a bullfight from other entertainments fail. It will be true to the letter, and give us as good an idea of the exact state or ruin of things in Spain as the most succinct and lucid reports under this head in the newspapers. And as for England, almost the last significant scrap of news from the quarter was the Revolution of 1649. If you have learned the history of her crops for an average year, you never need attend to that thing again, unless your speculations are of a mere pecuniary character. If one may judge, who rarely looks in the papers, nothing new does ever happen in foreign parts, a French Revolution excepted. So, anyway, a little excerpt from Walden. He has some really interesting and actually some very timely thoughts about what's important. Is it really important us to follow all the news that we do? In many ways, it just, he's calling it gossip. I think it just makes me anxious. So I think he has some really wise words there. So anyway, thank you for joining us for Wine and Words Wednesday. Again, my name is Mary Bear Shannon, and I am a reference librarian at the library. Tune in every Wednesday for Wine and Words Wednesday at 5. And we hope you have a great day. Thank you for joining us. Take care.